Welcome to the Parrot Life series on early parrot education for the companion bird.
This compilation was created by the Hagen Avicultural Research Institute team, which is the HARI team, and we'll be referring to our colleagues as such throughout the whole compilation. And it's important to note that we were privileged to receive insight from numerous aviculturists around the world in the years that it took us to actually develop this program. And so we've tried to present the latest innovations in or ideas on how we can actually educate our birds to be companion birds and for them to understand what that means.
The program has been divided into 2 volumes, and it includes video footage as well as material that can be downloaded and printed, and you can use this in your own nursery and adapt it as well for your own purposes.
The 2 volumes are very different from each other as well. Unfortunately, despite our efforts to make the first volume as entertaining as the second, it was impossible because we needed to not have birds with us when we were actually describing the structure and the philosophy behind the early parrot education. And therefore, we decided to rely more on using structure in a TV behind us so that you can then be equipped to understand how the second volume is going to go. Because it's much faster in the second volume where we're actually going through all of the stages.
Right, and the second volume is hands-on with the birds.
Yes, and so bear with us, and we hope you enjoy this first volume and proceed on to the second one. And perhaps in the future, you can send us back your comments as well, because nothing ever stays the way it was intended. Usually people evolve, and we will continue to do so. And so in the future, I wouldn't be surprised that we actually update a lot of our primary lessons, and we keep on adding more and more desensitization and lessons to educate our companion birds.
In this first volume, we're going to be discussing the philosophy behind the early parrot education program and why we believe it's important for the future of aviculture as well as for the companion parrot.
Yes, and then we'll move on and we'll start describing the 6 different stages of early parrot education. And I'll be saying important a lot throughout all of these video clips, but it's important that we stress that this program was targeted to the pre-fledgling age.
All the way to the juvenile age.
Yes, and so we will not be discussing any neonatal issues or any issues with older birds. And then we'll move on to describe all the different primary lessons that we'll be featuring throughout the whole program.
We'll be doing these one by one.
Yes, and we'll be describing them to you so that you can understand why we felt that they were important to include. We'll not be showing you how these get gradually accomplished or desensitized throughout the whole stages, but we will be talking about the importance of each of them. For example, the harness training.
Right.
Exactly.
We're also going to be discussing the various charts that we use throughout the program.
Yes, and how these can be used and modified for your needs, and why we believe that the more data that we collect, the better we will be to future educate other aviculturists and also share knowledge amongst ourselves, so that in the future we can thrive to become the best at what we do.
Throughout the educational program, the whole structure is going to be based on these 6 stages. We have them listed here.
Absolutely.
They're all color-coded.
Yes, and we like that because it keeps things structured.
That's right.
I mentioned that was really, really critical for us to also make sure that we were explaining and not forgetting anything at every single stage. Of course, when we first started out exploring early parrot education, we had started off with pre-weaning stage, weaned, and then post-weaning. Of course, everything always evolves and gets a little bit more complicated, but we are very comfortable now, and we've been exploring this for several years, to certainly say that with all the birds that we've raised, we definitely have 6 stages that we can clearly identify. And these will vary, where you will have a bird progress in the weaning independence and then regress, and that's still part of a normal stage 4, because that's what we know and feel usually happens even in a safe environment and one that was done with the best education.
I think it's important to discuss why there are no ages listed here.
Yes, and this is one of the reasons why this program took so much time also to structure, because we would have liked to put numbers of days or weeks that a macaw, green-winged macaw, would fall into stage 5 at what specific month, but there's a species variation that are quite marked, And there's also individuals that will not necessarily progress to the following stages, and maybe they will with certain types of primary lessons, but maybe they won't with others. There's a very, very big difference as well to the other birds in the flock at the period of the education that are also there to mentor, and also the number of birds within the clutch. So often the first one might not progress as fast as the third one that will spend quite a lot of time looking at his other siblings performing certain skills. So there's a lot of variability, and that's why throughout the program we've decided to use other tools to identify which stage the bird falls into. In addition to having the 6 stages of the early parrot education appear in different colors, we've also have a fundamental structure to this comprehensive guide where we're using the essential elements that we will be touching at every single stage in this format.
Exactly. The first essential element is the educational focus, and that's basically what we want to achieve at the stage.
Exactly.
And then we have the characteristics of the stage. That can include things like the beak commissure, whether the bird is on or off the hocks, just different things
Tonus
to look
of the
at.
crop as well. We will be discussing every individual one of these essential elements in a further section of the program.
Right.
But just to give a few more examples, we have also the housing.
The housing, the size of the cage that the bird would be in, the environment as
The
well.
accessorizing of the cage as well. There's
Exactly.
different stages where the birds will be more protected with visual blinds because they're at a very early stage still in our nursery, and then as they progress then they will be housed differently, of course, depending on their dexterity and other characteristics of that age. Yes,
Right. Another essential element would be the tools,
very important.
such as desensitizing.
Yes, and mentoring
Exactly.
and play, which is our favorite one of all to use for the educational purpose of this.
And then, of course, there's the feeding strategy, how often the bird would be fed, whether it's spoon feeding, syringe feeding.
Yes, and also what type of hand feeding formula or the granules, what type of food that we're going to be using at this particular stage.
Right.
And also what kind of chart that we will be using to record and to guide us as well during the feeding strategy.
Right. And finally, there's the primary lessons. There's a whole lot,
There's
list
a
of
whole
them.
lot of them, and we will also be going through every single primary lesson, such as the harness training and also the grooming and all the desensitization.
To the physical exam.
Exactly. And of course, these appear throughout the stages and sometimes in combination with tools
Right.
and with also feeding strategies, because sometimes they're done and accomplished and learned and desensitized with the help of something else that we're trying to do. It's very important that we mention that we will be describing for the purpose of this first volume in order for it to be easy to understand when we're going to be going through the stages further on in the second volume, what lesson we're trying to accomplish.
Right. It's important to note that it's a gradual process,
Yes.
right? That will be learned throughout the stages.
Throughout the stages. And not every single bird leaving our care will have completely had the opportunity to learn the final lesson or be completely desensitized to it.
Right.
A perfect example will be we live in Canada. It is warm in the summer but very cold in the winter, and some birds may never have the opportunity at our facility during the winter to fully accomplish the primary lesson of flying with a harness outdoors. Yet he may have been very comfortable wearing it indoors while we're doing the training. On the training stand, he may be very comfortable and being desensitized to, let's say, the rotary tool, but maybe never has had the experience to have his nail done with something else. But everything that has been learned or desensitized to, or the bird has taken pleasure to, will be written in the primary lesson report card.
Right. It's kind of like a scout badge.
Exactly, and then the caretaker can further on the education, depending at what stage this bird has reached.
Right. For the purpose of our demonstration of the primary lessons, we've used a mitred conure.
Yes, we wanted to simplify things so that we could show very efficiently what all the lessons learned were being, and of course the mitred conure was a perfect individual for us to use because this does not only apply to the larger parrots. Education is critical, even for the smaller conures and the cockatiels and the budgie. And so we decided to use this bird also because he is a little bit challenging at times, yet he has a lot of fun learning all of these primary lessons. So we had kept back 3 of our top fledglings that we really appreciated having in our nursery, and then for the purpose of photographing all of these lessons quickly, we decided to use our top students.
One essential element that will be included within each stage
Yes.
is tools, and we have them listed here.
Yes, and these are very important. They will appear in combination with all the other essential elements. So usually we will always have the tools listed in order to achieve which primary lesson.
Right.
We will also have the tools listed in order to achieve the feeding strategy that we're trying to do. It's very important. These tools, we normally do them just instinctively. But it's very important for us to have them written down in every single stage so that the caretaker remembers that they must not let go of the prior ones.
Exactly. For example, in stage 1, we would be using nurturing, monitoring, socialization. But that doesn't mean we're going to forget about them in stage 2, even though we are going to add some other tools.
And actually, for the success of this bird's life as a companion bird in our care, all of these tools must be used throughout his life. And so, of course, we will try and be careful not to do the nurturing that will lead to overindulgence, where we're cradling the bird and we're spending too much time doing this instead of making him be independent. But we will always, on a daily basis, be monitoring his health and also his progress. The socialization, the desensitization will be used throughout his life. When there's a new toy that might be introduced into the bird's cage, there will be always some form of desensitization.
Exactly.
So of course these are for the early parrot education, yet they are the fundamental structure for the whole life of the bird. And also to teach the caretaker what kind of tools he has in order to have a successful relationship with his bird.
An important part of a comprehensive guide is printable material. And here we have an example. We have the chicks' primary lessons. And this is downloadable on the Harry website. And I think we're going to get into the discussion a little bit about how this works right now.
Yes, well, it's very practical, and of course this actually leaves with the bird.
Yes.
When it leaves the store. So this is usually something that we want to have a rough copy of in the chicks file along with this weight chart.
Yes.
Because throughout the primary lessons and throughout the education of this bird, we're going to be noting down some notes and then of course print it on a clean paper and give it along with the bird when it leaves.
Right.
This is also something that we would want to discuss with the future caretaker because it's graded somewhat, depending on not necessarily the performance of the bird, but his the stage of desensitization.
Exactly, because when it leaves with the bird, this whole chart will not be filled out.
It will not be filled out completely, unless the bird was in your care for a long period of time, or unless he was an exceptional pupil and you had a lot of time in your nursery to actually do all of this education. A lot of this can be continued on at the new caretakers. And of course, this is a guide to show where the bird's at. And even more important, this is also a view into his personality. Because 2 birds of the same species, like the mitred conures, did not all perform, were not all as eager to play or to wear a harness, and some of them were desensitized much quickly to the different various lessons that we were doing or different objects. And so their personality varies within the clutch as well. And so this is more representative of the bird's character.
Right. We can also see that within each primary lesson there are different steps, so it depends at what stage the bird is at.
Yes, it's really broken down into all of the different procedures or techniques that we will be doing throughout the stages. So of course, during the towel training or towel cradling, we have even the first desensitization to this that would be carried on in the first stage where the bird is actually having a wet towel on his back.
Exactly.
And so we're doing this in order to as well allow the caretaker to know exactly where the bird's lessons have ended.
Yes.
And for a educator or caretaker of this new fledgling, if some of these steps have been missed, it doesn't mean that they cannot be carried on at a further step.
Right.
Especially for some of these eager to learn individuals, then a lot of these early desensitization might be something that they go through quite quickly, of course. Now we've zoomed in on the primary lesson chart just so that we can share with you the different aspects and components to it. We have, of course, on the very top part of the chart, which what we feel is the most important education that you can do for your birds when they're fledglings, is the nutritional education. And so dependent on your philosophy of what kind of foods the birds should be weaned on, ours, of course, the most important food that the birds are weaned on is the extruded diet. And so this here should be written very clearly so that the future caretaker can know. And for the future of the bird's health, should it get sick one day or relocated, then everybody would be able to know that this bird was weaned on a particular diet. Then, of course, very important to write down and specify, and it is going to be attached with another sheet for sure, to elaborate on all the enrichment foods that the birds were actually desensitized to and whether they enjoy them or not, and this would be in the 6th stage of the early parrot education.
Right. And here we have the in occupational skills, and we have them listed. But what is important to note is we have these columns here that list where the bird is at.
Yes.
Whether the bird is desensitized, whether it's comfortable with that particular skill, whether it's eager to learn, trained with reinforcement. And talking about trained with reinforcement, whether it's through nurturing, vocal reinforcement, clicker training, using granules
yeah,
as a reward, or seed.
Now we mentioned throughout, and we will be enforcing that again, that we do not use during the fledgling age and do not recommend that people use food,
right,
items of any kind to reinforce training, because the birds are still very fragile and could unwean.
Yes.
And so the food is something that should always be in abundance, and it's something that you should be doing along with your bird as a flock mentor. And so naturally, throughout the whole early parrot education, we will be mostly using the nurturing, the vocal reward, but we know a lot of breeders that like to use the clicker, so we've included it there so you can personalize your own early parrot educational program.
We've categorized the primary lessons in these sections here.
Yes.
Some of them we're going to be going in depth into.
Yes.
Others we don't really feel that
it's necessary.
to
No,
really
they're pretty
do so much in
straightforward,
depth.
but we still wanted to go through them, not individually, of course, because everyone can download their primary lessons report card. But just to explain quickly that there is different sections to them. We mentioned the towel cradling before.
Within the avian occupational skills, we have the basic routine physical exam, desensitizing them to the routine exam.
Exactly.
Grooming.
The
We talked about
grooming.
the nail.
And we felt that the showering and everything pertaining to the misting was also very important to include in the grooming.
Right.
Then we have the desensitization to various accessories within the cage.
Yes.
So that's another section that we will be spending quite some time on, explaining the importance of certain things. But in here is a very simple way for you to keep track. Of course, then we have the transporter,
Right.
physical education. And this is where, Suzanne, we feel is very important that it is clearly indicated what the grooming has been done on this bird and his experience of flight, which is very important for the future evaluation of this bird's psychological and physical health.
Right.
And so this is a place where we have to be very honest. Well, we should be honest throughout the whole evaluation of this bird, but this is very, very important.
There are the socialization skills.
Yes, and of course some of these are very difficult for us to take a picture of them.
Yes.
But simple things like which caretakers, male and female, have been exposed to the bird, if we have also exposed these birds to different animal species, to an aquarium. And then we have the final and very important part, which is the enrichment skills that these birds were actually desensitized to.
That's right, whether they've been exposed to the outside, to television, to music, to different types of foraging.
We've left a section here for comments, and of course we encourage all aviculturalists, and perhaps in a few years we'll have a 6-page report card of primary lessons, but there's definitely numerous things that add on, and depending on your experience with your birds and what you're capable of enriching their lives with, definitely there's a lot of things that we've missed out, and so we definitely encourage you to create your own and to start off with this one, and maybe one day we'll have an opportunity to share a lot of this information amongst each other.
We're going to be speaking about the chick growth chart right now, and this is a chart that's used prior to the early parrot education.
Yes.
Another thing that we can notice here is that it's bordered in pink. everything that we are going to have in this comprehensive guide to do with prior to the educational stages is going to be in
It's
pink.
going to be in pink, just to keep things organized.
Exactly. The chick growth chart was one of the first charts that was created at Harry, and that was for the quality assurance.
Yes, because in order to have proper quality assurance, because we do test lot feed every single lot that is manufactured of our hand feeding formula, we rely heavily on the health evaluation on a daily basis of our chicks because we have several weeks to test every lot, and therefore we need to have concrete evidence that the birds are actually gaining their weight. In a chick growth chart that is used prior to the early parrot education, as you mentioned before, we are expecting the birds to have physical growth, especially a weight increase. And it's very specific. What we're looking for with the Tropican hand feeding formula is a 10% increase, starting from the lag phase, which is the first few days after hatching, and then a complete 10% stride until we reach the plateau stage, which is where the onset of the early parrot education would start.
Right.
And then of course we'd be switching charts.
Right. There's a section here for the hand feeding formula, the brand, the lot, expiration date. This was not removed from the chart for this purpose.
Actually, originally we wanted to remove it because this is what we use internally. And then we realized that we rely heavily as well on customer feedback, and we do a lot of customer service, and we like to know what lot, what date birds are being fed, especially when they're being fed our product, because this is to further the quality assurance that we can do with our customers. Everything is always tested at Hari before it gets released. So we're not relying on our customers to test the food for us. Although in past years we have several people that raise lorries on our diets, that raise large groups of African greys on our diet, species that we don't have enough quantity to have perhaps several years of database to know what is the preferred or the most common growth curve.
Some breeders may not be using this chart at all though. If the chicks are going to be parent raised, they wouldn't have a need for it.
Yes, well, more and more the trend is going back to now because allowing the parents to raise their chicks. We did several years of incubator raising because there was a lot of diseases, polyoma disease, the virus, there was the parrot beak and feather disease, there was issues with PDDE, which is now called coronavirus. There was numerous factors why parents were being not allowed to raise their chicks in the past. But now that most of these diseases are controllable, they're preventable, we can vaccinate the birds, we can test the parents. The trend is principally to go back to allow the parents to be educated to raise their chicks and to give them this rewarding experience. And so yes, if we are to pull the chicks, ideally when they are old enough that we can continue the early parrot education, then we would not have a need for this chart. At Hari, once again, because we have to do test lot feeding on every single lot, sometimes this obliges us to pull out chicks a little bit early on.
Right.
But ideally, we do favor the parents feeding the birds for as long as possible because there is no contradiction to that. There is not one hand feeding formula in the world that exists that has the same properties that would allow for optimal digestibility and the nurturing that can be gotten from the actual parents. The practical use of this chart is not simply to record the weight gain of the bird on a daily basis. There's a lot of health parameters that also get recorded on this chart on a daily basis. This is very important, especially when we're trying to evaluate the nutritional value of a food, when we're trying to look at digestibility and palatability, and also when we want to make sure that there's no other components around the bird that is affecting his performance.
Right. As you mentioned, the weight should be taken daily.
Yes.
And it is important that it is done first thing in the morning when the crop is empty. If the crop isn't empty, it's important to note the time that you've taken the weight.
Should we have to empty the crop out and do a crop wash and then maybe just weigh the bird a little bit later that morning because of this? Then it's very important to record it because there will be a difference with the daily weight gain that's expected at that point.
Right. Here we would have the second column would list the general impression of the bird's health.
Yes.
Yes.
It's not a physical exam, but it's just a general reaction of the bird and how he's doing that day.
Right. And along with the weight, we would have the quantity and the frequency of the feeding.
Yes, this is what we're expecting to do. Now, if this is to change throughout the day, then we just come back and change it and write our signature again. Of course, when we're multiple people taking care of chicks in a nursery. This is still very important even if there's only one caretaker.
Yes.
Because it can be reference material for future birds being raised in that aviary, or even for material that we want to give out to the people perhaps one day buying our birds from us, our breeding pairs, and they want to know how it's done with this particular species. So it's very good information to keep back for our own reference.
Right. This is not necessarily something that would go with the bird to just the caretaker.
No, not really. The primary lessons would go with the bird and perhaps the final weights of the bird. But this chick growth chart usually stays with the breeder in his data recording files. And of course, Suzanne, this will get dirty in a nursery. You know, we're feeding birds, our hands are wet.
It's a good idea to plasticize it.
Definitely.
And this information can be transferred onto the computer?
Yes, out of breeding season is when we usually have time to take all of our data that we've compiled and it's all messily written in files, and we can actually transfer all this information into our computers. It's very important to add here that because this is a health monitoring chart and not just a weight growth chart, we want to make sure that we're writing the feeding response. Very, very important for us at Harvey to write down the intensity of the feeding response, because this is a very fine indication to us whether the bird is actually doing extremely well or there's maybe an underlying health issue. So also the importance of writing down if the crop was emptying well and if there was sufficient crop motility activity going on. Very important for the quality control again, and for the assurance that our birds are being maintained in the right environment.
Yeah, we have the brooder temperature listed here, and of course the caretaker's initials.
Yes, it's kind of nice to know who wrote down the information. And very important as well, we have a lot of information on the chart, and sometimes we often attach other charts to this one where we're doing a special care on birds. We will have a special care chick chart that we add where we have more detail as to what we're doing. But it is important for all our caretakers to know if there's any additional hydration going on, if there is a crop broad that needs to be placed because the crop of that bird has unfortunately become too large and is becoming pendulant, or if there's any treatment or a blood sampling that needs to be done, or a vet exam that is recommended. So this is definitely a very important tool for communication that needs to be recorded, and we feel very seriously that this is a fundamental part of the early parrot education and the pre-early parrot education preparation.
Once the chicks have reached their plateau weight, it's an indication, along with other physical characteristics, that we would begin the early parrot education.
Yes, and so we would stop using the chick growth chart at that point.
Right.
And we would switch on to now the weaning growth chart.
Exactly.
The fundamental education that we're doing throughout the early parrot education is basically weaning. And so this is very important that the daily weight monitoring, and in this case it's not going to be for weight gain.
No.
Because we've said before they've reached a plateau, so we're not expecting them to gain weight.
Right.
But we don't want them to lose too much weight either, right?
That's right. There's a 10% allowance of their highest weight.
Exactly, but that has to be done very gradually. Starvation weaning is definitely not something we want to endorse or we would ever practice. And so abundance weaning is something that we do, but completely with pellets throughout the first 5 stages. We're making sure that these birds are not in any way, which form throughout the day starved.
That's right.
Because all their education will then not be accomplishable because they can't think.
That's right. And when we start using this weaning growth chart, this is a time when we will stop doing 100% hand feeding.
Yes, and this is a major difference with the other chart.
Right.
Because we were writing down how many syringes, how many milliliters of food that we were offering of the hand feeding formula. And in the weaning growth chart, we're actually still using technically the hand feeding formula, but it's been converted now into granules, into sticks, into biscuits.
It's the high performance.
Yes, so it's different texture.
It's a different texture, but it's the same formula.
Yes, and then we're going to be using it now for foraging in the bottom of the chick pen in the first stage, which we call the elementary foraging skills, which is a window of opportunity for us to start allowing these birds to find within the substrate, which is what they do in the wild as well, because they're starting to wobble around and to move a little bit. They're spending a lot more time awaken also during the day. So they have a lot more energy now, and we can start spoon feeding these birds with soaked granules.
Right, or giving soft food in a dish.
As it progresses, we'll be offering the soft food and then doing assisted feeding, which we relate to actually physically either syringe feeding them or offering them the soaked pellets with a spoon.
Right.
But then we can still be presenting wet soaked granules that are used for weaning for a longer period of time for sure.
Right.
It's also very important, Suzanne, that during the first stages, especially, that we're still weighing these birds on a daily basis. And I think a lot of caretakers are reluctant to do so because their nails are very, very sharp. The birds are usually heavier.
Kind of clumsy.
They're clumsy. They have a big crop because this is the biggest crop that they're ever going to get when we start this early parrot education. And this is when they need to be weighed on a daily basis. It's very important for health management, but it's also important for us to maintain and ensure that the weaning is done gradually.
Right.
And it is not done with any kind of weight or food deprivation.
Something else that we see here is the monitoring of the droppings,
Yes,
which
that's
is
very
extremely important when they're weaning.
It's going to be a very good indication for us to know how they successfully performed the feeding prior. Now, again, the feedings throughout the day are separated into 4 sections. Because at this stage, we would normally have up to 4 feedings during the day.
Right, and it would vary whether it's morning, noon, evening.
Yes, and they have to be supervised, and we need to gauge this, whether we're going to do one type or another of feeding assistance, or we're just going to offer them wet food. And we need to write this. And so this is the most important communication chart for us, and this is where confusion can happen the most frequently, especially when there's more than one caretaker. Because all the steps that we've done forward with a bird can easily regress if somebody puts them right back to being completely syringe fed. There's a very important medical consideration to trying to regress the crop at this age. We're trying to make sure that the gastrointestinal tract of these birds is performing and is not lazy. And so we don't want to encourage these birds to have a large crop, which would not be normal in the wild, Suzanne, we know that. They're preparing themselves for the fledgling age in the first 2 stages. And this would never be possible with a large crop. And so this is not natural for us to be feeding these large quantities of food for prolonged periods of time. And so this is the technique that we've been using for several years very successfully with our hand feeding diets. And the Tropican hand feeding formula is then, like I said prior, is being used in a granule, in a stick, in a biscuit. And this allows the crop now to be able to regress.
Right.
Very important at this stage, Suzanne, that the birds will also be gradually starting to be desensitized to a lot of the primary lessons.
Exactly.
And so all of these can be written as well. We're not going to do every single one of them in a day. And if we would have the opportunity to do that, we can then use, of course, abbreviations.
Right.
And it's also very important that we write if the bird is now drinking more water.
Right, or requiring any special care.
This is very important to write as well. So this chart may leave with the caretaker, and so this one, if it is the last one to leave with the caretaker, can be rewritten in a clean format, because of course this one also will be getting quite dirty. We're carrying this one around, and this one is also going to be used to indicate whether the bird needs to change housing requirements, or if the perches perhaps could be placed a little higher. So there's a lot of stuff that's going to be communicated throughout this chart.